Afternoon, guys. Actually, good morning, I guess, whatever time it is for you. It is Tuesday afternoon. Sounds like I've got a sick little one at home. I won't be in on Wednesday. I want to put this out in front of you guys as we're looking at the letter to the Colossians. And what you've done so far in class today, you should have watched the Bible Project video that's the introduction to Colossians. So if you haven't done the Bible Project's introduction or overview for Colossians, then you need to watch that. Then you need to come to this. You can take notes on both. The Colossians video from the Bible Project breaks the letter to the Colossians down into four major sections. The first section deals with the exalted Messiah. Jesus talked about as the image of the invisible God and the fullness of the deity that dwells in him and that kind of thing. The second major section that the Bible Project charts out is Paul's sort of suffering but work in ministry as an apostle. And then the third section is the pressure the Colossian church seems to be feeling to turn away from the faith Paul is putting in front of them. And then a response to that pressure in chapters 3 and 4 about what this resurrection life looks like in Jesus Christ. What I would like to do is offer you a bit of a different sort of walking commentary through the letter. I think there's a major message that gets repeated pretty consistently as the Colossian letter develops. I also think there's a centralized instruction that's got shadows of it that shows up again later and later as the Colossian letter unfolds. And so what I'd like to do is hit those major sections with you in a brief kind of way, and then talk you through sorry, I lost my train of thought. And then walk you through what's going on in these major sets of instructions. So we're going to look at message pieces, and then we're going to look at instruction pieces, and just kind of walk through major streams of thought and where those streams of thought show up in the Colossian letter, and then ask you, as you consider and continue to work through your work, where what I'm talking about here might answer questions 2 and 3 in the literary context and in sort of the message and instruction deal in the discussion post that you'll be doing in a little while here. So first, there's a paragraph here in chapter 1 that I think really starts to get at the core of what Paul wants to get at in the letter. And it starts in verse 9 and it ends in verse 14. And in that is this idea that the major message of the book is that he has delivered us from the domain of darkness and transferred us to the kingdom of his beloved Son. And 14, in whom we have the redemption, the forgiveness of sins. And I think this really is the core. This is the major message. Why is it that Jesus is able to do that? Because 15, he's the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. He created all things, and all things hold together in him. The Bible Project has a cool sort of chunking and paralleling here in this poetic styled section, where the movement of the first few lines, the image of the invisible God, gives way to him being firstborn over all creation, gives way to him being the creator of all things, whether they are visible or invisible, whether they are dominions and rulers or authorities, it doesn't matter. All things were created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And that's the first movement of that. And so here's kind of the deal. I think what Paul has done here is done this. We give thanks to God. We are strengthened, and I'm going to come back to these key ideas here in a second. We have increasing knowledge of God. We are bearing fruit. We walk worthy because of verses 13 and 14. He's delivered us from the domain of darkness and transferred us into the kingdom of his beloved Son. How did that happen? That happened in 15 through 20. Because the Creator, the image of the invisible God, who is the firstborn over all creation, is also, verse 18, the head of the church. The beginning, the firstborn, there it is again, from the dead, so that in everything he might be preeminent or have first place. In him, the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, visible or not visible, making peace through the blood of his cross. And so here's what I think you have in 15 through 20. I think you have a parallel sort of structure like the Bible Project has laid out. In 15 and 17, you have the image of the invisible God, who is the firstborn and is the creator. And in 18 through 20, you have the head of the body, the church, the beginning, who is the firstborn, and in him all the fullness of God dwells. He was pleased to reconcile through the blood of the cross us back to God. And so in 15 through 17, we have Jesus as the image who is the creator. But in 18 through 20, we have Jesus who is the recreator. This is how we've been delivered from darkness and transferred to the kingdom of the Son. God's creation in 15 through 17, plunged into the darkness of sin and death and despair, saved in 18 through 20 by the head of the church, the firstborn, the fullness of God who died on the cross in our place. And so I think what we have in 15 through 20 is a sort of expositing, poetic, unpeeling, I don't know how else to say that, right? Pulling back on some of this and imaging it for us in ways so that we understand we've been delivered from this darkness and transferred to the kingdom of the Son. I think that is the major message of the book. But the major instruction of the book is in 1:10 through 12. He starts in verse 9 talking about that he's praying and asking that the Colossians be filled with the knowledge of the will of God and all spiritual wisdom and understanding. And then in 10, it starts the instructions, so that they would walk worthy of the Lord, pleasing to him, bearing fruit in every good work, increasing in the knowledge of God, and being strengthened with all power, according to his glorious might, for endurance and patience with joy, giving thanks to the Father who's qualified you to share in the inheritance of the saints of light. I think this is the major instruction. And then I think what happens in the Colossian letter is that he goes from this main message and main instruction, and in chapter 2, verse 9, he repeats something from that message, this idea of the fullness of God. In 2 verse 9, he says, the whole fullness of deity dwells in him bodily. And you've been filled with him who is the head. There's that head of the church vocabulary again. Of all rule and authority. It's a compressing of the whole poetic section of 1:15 through 20. Right? This is the message. In him, the whole fullness of the deity dwells bodily. And you've been filled with him. So what then? So 11 through 15. Buried with him in baptism, we're raised with him through faith in the powerful working of God who raised him from the dead. We were dead in our trespass. We're now alive together with him. He's canceled the debt that stood against us, nailing it to the cross. He's disarmed the rulers and the powers and the principalities. This is the message again. And it's at the core. This is the transfer from the kingdom of darkness to the kingdom of light. Chapter 3, verses 1 through 4. If then you've been raised with Christ. Now the instructions, seek the things that are above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on the things that are above, not on the things that are on the earth. For you have died and your life is hidden with Christ in God. This is that transfer, kingdom of darkness to the kingdom of light. When Christ, who is your life, appears, then you also will appear with him in glory. So then what's the instruction? Put to death, therefore, what is earthly in you. And then you get the list. Sexual immorality and impurity and passion and desire and covetousness and idolatry and all of these things, put them away. You used to walk in these ways, but now you put them away. Don't lie to one another. Put that away. Verse 12, put on as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, kindness and compassion, humility, meekness, patience, bearing with one another, forgiving one another as the Lord forgave you. So you must also forgive one another. But above all of these things, put on love. See, this is the instruction now. This is a how we walk worthy. Okay. Based on the message that is this transfer from the kingdom of darkness to the kingdom of light that belongs to the Son who's redeemed us. And so in 12 through 17 of chapter 3, we get this really poignant but big picture. This is how we walk. In chapter 3, verse 18 to chapter 4, verse 1, we get how the Christian household gets restructured in light of this walking it out that he's just taught us about in chapter 3, verses 12 through 17. Whatever you do in word or deed, in everything, give thanks to God the Father through Jesus Christ. Well, so hold on then. So what does that look like if I'm supposed to put on love, if I'm supposed to forgive, if I'm supposed to be compassionate and kind? It looks like this. Wives, submit to your husbands. Husbands, love your wives. And the Bible Project video hits on this really particularly. This is sort of how Paul's material works. There's a major idea in chapter 1 of the letter. We've been delivered from darkness to the kingdom that belongs to the Son. Why? Because the Son is the image of the invisible God. He's the firstborn over all creation. He's the creator of all things, seen and unseen. He's the head of the body, the church. He's the firstborn from among the dead. In him, the fullness of God dwells, and he reconciles the world through the blood of his cross. That's why. Now, what do? Now we walk worthy of the Lord, bearing fruit in every good work, learning and growing in our knowledge of God, being strengthened in his power by his glorious might, enduring with patience and joy, giving thanks to the Father who has qualified us through his Son to share in the inheritance of the saints. This is the idea. The instruction is to walk worthy. Walking worthy looks like bearing fruit, growing in our knowledge of God, being strengthened, enduring, and being grateful. That's the instruction. Those 5 points. Gratitude, endurance, strength, growing in our knowledge of God, and bearing fruit in every good work. Why? Because we've been transferred from the domain of darkness to the kingdom of his beloved Son, and we have redemption in him. In who? The one who is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation, the creator himself, the head of the body that is the church, the firstborn from among the dead, and the one with the fullness of God who reconciles the world to himself. This is the idea in the Colossian letter. And what he does is he lays this out, and then he comes back to those same sets of ideas as the letter progresses. He starts with it, and then he comes back and he hits on it again in chapter 2, 9 and 10, in 2, 11 through 15, into 17. The substance belongs to Christ. In 3:11, Christ is in all because he's the head of the body. He comes back to these ideas and he comes back to the instructions. Set your minds on things that are above. Put on kindness and humility, meekness and patience, forbearance, forgiveness, love. Put these things on. Live these ways. Well, what does that look like in practice? I'm glad you asked. Wives, it looks like this. Husbands, it looks like this. Slaves, it looks like this. Masters, it looks like this. Children, it looks like this. Fathers, it looks like this. And he addresses all of us wherever we're at. Why do we do these things the way that we do them? Because we are not in charge of any of it. Christ is the head. Christ is first. Christ is all in all. And so my loving my wife and being sacrificial in the way that I take care of my wife and my family isn't about some sort of great model of leadership. It's about acknowledging the lordship of Jesus Christ and then loving my family the way Jesus loves us. Paul's instruction in any of his letters about wives submitting to their husbands isn't about some sort of like weird male chauvinistic, male dominant society thing. It's about, look, this is how Jesus has responded to the will of the Father and redeemed us through it. So wives, this is how you exemplify that model in your home with your husband. As he lays down his life for you, you lay down your life for him. This is how this is supposed to work. Okay? This is what Paul is talking about. This is what Paul's talking about as he works through the Colossian letter. And he gives us meaning and message, and then he moves and gives us instruction. Okay? All right. We'll pick up there the next time I see you guys. Bye. Come on. You're good, man.